Okay, I am all about talking about gut health and how to feel our best as we age so we can thrive and perform our best and enjoy life and all of that the second half of our life. So I heard about Dr. Michael and wanted to dive into some different topics, Candida, thyroid, and all other things that you might be struggling with that you don't really correlate or put all the pieces of the puzzle together to wondering, hey, why don't I feel great? I'm doing all the right things and I'm not getting results. So, Dr. Michael, thanks for sharing some wisdom to our aging population here, endurance athlete world that think that
Sure.
they're invincible because they exercise.
Yeah, I used to feel that way too.
Superhero, superhuman.
Yeah, until my third marathon.
Yeah, and then what happened?
It was in New York City.
Oh, my favorite race.
Potholes.
Yeah.
I had pothole-itis.
Oh, pothole. You stepped in potholes?
Oh yeah, yeah. And not good. Not good.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting what you're bringing up because what is good for one person can be bad for another. And
Yes,
I
true.
and the two topics you just brought up, thyroid and candida, I don't think we could find more exemplary examples of people who think they're doing everything right, but are actually doing everything wrong. Now when it comes to candida, a person could be doing what the American Heart Association considers a healthy diet, and for a candida patient, that would just ruin them. The carbs and the sugar and all the garbage
Hmm.
in that diet would just exhaust the person and flare up all their symptoms. And it's a funny thing too, since the American Heart Association has been pushing their version of a healthy diet, cardiovascular disease has gone way up,
Yep.
which is kind of interesting. And then
Yep.
with thyroid patients, um, patients normally would want to eat a lot of healthy vegetables. But unfortunately, there is a family of vegetables which is really bad for thyroid patients. It's the Brassica family. It's
Hmm.
broccoli, cauliflower, turnips, mustard. All of these foods contain thiocyanates, which are, if you interpret the word thiocyanate in Latin, it actually means poison to the thyroid. So these thiocyanates downgrade your thyroid function. So
Yeah.
they're just coming
There's
right out of the
it's super
gate. There's those two
complicated.
examples. Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. Who are you? Why are you following information on candida and thyroid and all different things how health impacts us as we age?
I'm a naturopathic doctor, and when I was in
Mhm.
school back in the early 80s, I was fascinated with interpreting lab work on people. And I was studying data from Jim Sema and Ken Brockman and all of these sort of barnstorming chiropractors who were taking regular blood work and learning from the regular blood work things that weren't necessarily thought of to be gotten from it because most doctors look at the blood work and they think pathology. And we were looking at it and thinking physiology. And when I got out of school, I wanted to develop a computer. This is in the 80s that could take all the data that we had on interpreting blood work in this sort of avant-garde way and then input the patient's own data in there, and the computer would spit out this whole report that usually would take me hours to do. So I was doing this, and a woman in a health food store who I met told me that I should go visit this Dr. Santoro out on Long Island because he was already doing this. He had already put this together. So I went to see this gentleman. It was fascinating, changed my life because he ended up being a aerospace physiologist. He was also a naturopath, and he was the person who developed the life support systems on the lunar module, which is the LEM craft that landed on the moon. And he had a whole team of nutritionists there he was working with, and they were putting together a computerized system to analyze the astronauts' blood work, so
Yeah.
that they could get blood work on the astronauts, and it would look at their amino acid balance, their calcium, look at all these things, so that when they were in space for extended periods of time, they would know what supplements to give them to keep everything balanced, so that they didn't lose bone mass, they didn't lose muscle mass. So I worked with them for many years, and we started to use the same computer software in practice, private practice. And we encountered a group of people who had strange reactions to what we were doing with them. Now, probably 70% of the people did great. We reversed their asthma, reversed their arthritis, reversed all these things using nutraceuticals. But there was about 30% of the people who had crazy reactions to the vitamins. And I decided to volunteer to find out what was wrong with these people. And a year later, I figured out that they all had Candida. Now, I didn't know what Candida was back then. This is in the 80s, you see.
Like,
So I told these people that you have this fungus overgrowth. You have to go to your doctor and tell him it's Candida. And I gave them the stool studies that showed they had this. I said, go tell him to cure you and then come back and we'll put you back. And I was very naive. Tell him to cure you and I'll come back and we'll put you on the program. Well, I got all these phone calls from patients. The doctor said there's no such thing as Candida. The doctor said everybody has Candida. This doctor says I don't know how to cure it. This doctor said this. So I told them to then go see two functional doctors I knew at the time. As a matter of fact, they were probably the only two. The first two, one was Robert Atkins, who I knew. He was a friend. And the other was Ronald Hoffman, who was also a friend. These are the two original, probably functional doctors in Manhattan. So they went to them, and they called me and they said, this was much better. They knew what you were talking about. And they said, yes, I did have it. But they treated me for it and it kept coming back. So I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to figure this out. So I spent the next 30 years unraveling all the myths and the tricks that Candida plays. And eventually then I wrote my book back in 2016, The Candida Chronicles, which actually is a book that chronicled my journey in figuring out Candida and all the tricks it plays on you.
yeah.
And here we are today.
Yeah. It is, I wrote a book called Life is Not a Race, It is a Journey. More same thing to chronicles of what happened to me when I got metabolic chaos or adrenal exhaustion. So it's sometimes helpful to share your own journey, to share what your experience was with Candida overgrowth, that we all have some Candida at some level, correct? I've heard. And it's just if it gets too much
It's
of anything,
normal.
it's a Goldilocks effect for
It's it
everything.
is it is normal to have in your body. What the functional aspect of Candida is that when you die, Candida is what decomposes your body.
Oh, really?
This is what embalming
Does it?
fluid is nothing more than a big zap of antifungal.
Mm.
That's what, because Candida is the principal thing that makes your body decompose.
Hmm.
So when you embalm somebody, what you're actually giving them is antifungal liquids to preserve the tissue so the fungus doesn't break down your tissue.
Yeah.
So that's its function. However, when you're alive and it gets out of hand, it can be the darndest thing anyone's ever seen.
Mm.
Because Candida could produce 150 different symptoms and nobody would ever figure it out. It's one of the greatest undiagnosed issues. In our world today, we have several things which fall into this heading of undiagnosed issues that continue to just sneak past everybody. And Candida is one of the major ones. The second one is toxic metal exposure. Is
Hmm.
what I actually practice is clinical ecology. So I deal with a lot of environmental illness in people, which, well, a lot of it comes from mold in their
I was
environment
going to say mold, isn't
or
it?
toxic metals. Yeah. But
Would
Candida
Candida
is the
fill
other.
up? Is that all under the same category though of toxins or endotoxins? Is the mold, heavy metals, Candida, they're all kind of same?
Yes, they are. And then throw in thyroid because Candida has a particular affinity for the thyroid. That's why I have a website that's
Oh,
dedicated to thyroid. That's why the two things in all my press stuff that I specialize in is Candida and thyroid because they both affect each other heavily.
is that Candida the thyroid's impact because of the adrenal gland cortisol? Is that relationship? Because anytime cortisol, chronic stress, HPA axis dysfunction, the thyroid's impacted too.
Part of it.
Hmm.
More directly is Candida has a particular affinity for thyroid, and when it causes autoimmune function, it very often hits the thyroid. Like there are the doctors I know who will swear there is no such thing as Hashimoto's. All Hashimoto's is caused by leaky gut, which is caused by Candida.
Hmm.
I wouldn't go that far because I've seen independent cases, but I've seen enough cases to see where they're coming from. So Candida can directly affect your thyroid And hormonally, it interacts with your thyroid because Candida is very estrogenic. As an organism, estrogen stimulates the growth of Candida, and Candida also stimulates your estrogen receptors. So when you increase estrogen sensitivity, you automatically regulate all your thyroid function because estrogen and thyroid hormones are antagonistic to each other. They're not synergistic, they're antagonistic.
So what happens as we age then for us females?
Well, that's where you run into some women who have certain symptoms that go away after menopause because their estrogen drops. But you can get other problems if your progesterone drops too much. Progesterone and thyroid hormones are also synergistic.
Mm-hmm.
So you can line this all up. You have cortisol and estrogen, which downregulate thyroid, and then you have testosterone and progesterone, which upregulate thyroid. So it depends. It's a roll of the dice. Depends on where your hormones go as you get older. What's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, that's when I do hormone testing, the Dutch test to test. You see all these different patterns. It's not just the test report, people look at the results, but it's more like, all right, we see this high, this low, and then correlate that to your blood chemistry panel, your full thyroid panel, and then correlate that to your gut test. And it's pretty fascinating to see, how everything works together in our body. It's pretty much of that homeostasis for everything to work at optimal level for using our innate
This is
intelligence.
why the Dutch test is the superior test. It's the only one I use.
Really?
And it's superior because it shows you each conversion point that occurs.
Yeah.
And this goes back to now another interesting point is that when you look at that Dutch test and you're looking at each step of the hormone's evolution, the conversions need thyroid hormone to work. So if you have someone who's not converting, even though the Dutch test doesn't look for thyroid hormones because they're still stably from laboratory work is not a way to get thyroid hormones to show up well in your urine or your saliva. Blood is still the superior way for thyroid. But those conversions need thyroid hormone.
T3 to T4, what specific conversions? Just to
All of them.
clarify.
Just
All.
about every conversion you see of every hormone requires thyroid in order to make that complete.
So,
DHEA
okay.
to testosterone, everything. Pregnenolone to DHEA, all of it requires thyroid. If your thyroid's down, you don't convert.
Where do we start to find out what are signs and symptoms of Candida overgrowth? Where do you start? Do you look at thyroid symptoms or Candida? I mean, how do people work backwards and figure out, oh, I might have some of this?
It's a good question. The symptoms of thyroid of Candida typically start out with the person noticing an energy drop or feeling a little bit like they have the flu now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start noticing digestive changes.
Mm-hmm.
They start noticing that they're gassy, they're bloating, they're reacting strange to foods that they never reacted to, and they could either usually be constipated. What will happen? Then they'll notice a severe energy drop, and they'll notice more food reactions, and then they start noticing that they're becoming sensitive to their environment, chemicals, smells, odors they're reacting to and don't feel too well around. Then they can start developing rashes. Now here's where you get into pathology. Start developing unknown skin rashes, but then you could start getting asthma. You can start developing rheumatoid arthritis. You can start developing autoimmune illnesses, your ANA levels,
Mm-hmm.
um, your SED rate, CRP, all these things will go positive. And the doctor's trying to figure it out. And you keep telling him, well, I can't, my digestion's bad. And he's saying, no, you have arthritis, so
Take this pill.
Candida it produces a spectrum of symptoms that people would never figure all are coming from the same place.
But I
That's
hear that
what's
too with
interesting,
mold toxicity too. Is
which
that, I
is in the
mean,
same family.
same family because it's
Yeah,
a fungus. So
yeah,
same with
yeah,
mold. Candida is a type of fungus.
yes. And Candida is a dimorphic fungus, which makes it more fun. Because dimorphic means able to live in two different states. So Candida presents itself either as a yeast or a fungus. And
Mm,
like a chameleon, it can flip back and forth,
nice.
which makes it even more confusing.
Wow. It's like metabolic flexibility, carbs to fat burning fuel. It's more candida if it's a yeast or a fungus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then there's a lot of evidence now that Candida can actually feed on ketone bodies, which
Oh,
makes it even a bigger mess.
yeah,
So
that
it's
wouldn't
got
be
you
good if
coming and
that's true.
going. It's got you coming and going.
All right, so the candida symptoms seem similar to a lot of others, though. So that's why we need to test, not guess. Is it candida? Is it SIBO? Is it a parasite? Is
This
it
is why
mold
it's
toxicity?
confusing. That's
Yeah.
why it's confusing. It all goes under the heading of dysbiosis.
Yes.
And it's basically saying
Catch-all phrase.
there are different types of dysbiosis, and dysbiosis can cause different types of metabolic syndromes. So I think if we
Hmm.
said that, we'd be safe in saying that. That would be a true statement, and that hits all the bases. But there are different types of dysbiosis, as you just mentioned. You can have SIBO, you can have bacterial dysbiosis, you can have some protozoa, you can have candida, you can have a combination of all of them, which some people
Hmm.
have. And then there's what those things do to your metabolism, how they affect your thyroid, how they affect your hormones, how they affect that whole spectrum. And it's, I guess you could say you could get a paper bag and put your dysbiosis in there, put your genetics in there, put your diet in there, put your environment in there, shake it all up and spill it out, and that's you in that situation.
Yeah, that's what we have to do is look at it all. That's why we can't just give one program for everyone. That it's so much of what we do as FDN practitioners is health investigation and look at genetics, look at your signs and symptoms, look at what you're eating, what you're doing, what your lifestyle, your exercise program is, and then add that to the lab test assessment to figure out what is going on underneath the hood.
When I was
Yeah.
working with these doctors I was telling you about before, with the space program, all of these people were aerospace physiologists. They were all engineers, but at the same time, physiologists and
Mm,
nutritionists. So it gave me a unique perspective in working with them for 10 years because I got to learn, luckily, to think like an engineer would think,
mm,
which is sort of the complete opposite of how a medical doctor thinks. A medical doctor thinks in subspecialties. You know,
yeah.
you go to the medical doctor, you go to the eye doctor, he can look at your eye and he
Hmm.
looks at it and he observes things. But then if he wants more data, he's going to send you to a different doctor who then can actually touch different things in there and do deeper tests. And then you can end up going to four different specialists because there's four different doctors that do four different things with your eyes, which, you know, that it's subspecialties really aren't a good way to look at things because that's not how your body works. Your body is a big system and it has
Hmm.
subsystems, and all the subsystems report back to the systems, and then they all report to a central regulating factor, which is your nervous system and your brain, which are controlling everything from either the parasympathetic or the sympathetic side. So when you get a look at it from that viewpoint, it's a little easier to understand how your body works.
Hmm. Yes, I find it fascinating to put all that together, not just look at, I know when my dad passed away 2 years ago, I blame the doctors for a lot why he didn't make it, sadly, because he saw a heart doctor. He had a heart attack 10 years before. He was in the hospital, who comes in all different times. They're not communicating. They say they're having a meeting, collaborate, but when's the heart doctor? When's the kidney doctor? Because his kidney started to have issues. And then he had a type of lymphoma cancer. So he had a cancer doctor. So all three of them are giving the treatment of medication and not working together versus holistic approach, integrative approach. I wish people would look at more as looking at, okay, all this is connected and the role of our liver and our detox pathways need to be addressed too. So it's interesting. Here, you've had your own journey going through all this, figuring it out.
You know what's fascinating is when you combine all these medicines, nobody knows what they do.
Yeah,
It's because
I know.
you're
Cross
creating
reactivity.
brand new compounds in the person's body of all of these medications. And
Hmm.
it's the trick that these doctors try to pull is figuring out how the kidney doctor's medicine is affecting your heart because it's affecting your fluid your fluid balance, and you're right. It's amazing. It's very difficult, and unnecessarily so. Because if you just stand back and you understand how each system affects everything,
Yeah.
makes it a lot easier.
Well, I find over the years dabbling into health practitioner work, last 5, 10 years, is that the role of the liver and the detox pathways, the drainage pathways, before we do anything, do you find that you need to start with looking at the liver function, liver, gallbladder, lymphatic flow before you're having any, once you figure it out, protocols
We,
to kill off?
when somebody comes to me, the initial tests we do give us a big overall look at everything that's going on with them. And we do that specifically so that we don't encounter any floorboards that come up and hit us in the head as they're
Mm-hmm.
going through. Because if you have somebody who comes and says, "Well, I have Candida, I know it, I have all the symptoms, blah, blah, blah." Well, that's okay, but you don't know how they're going to respond to a Candida program, if they're going to be able to handle the die off. You don't know if they have leaky gut. You don't know what else they have going on. So you've got to get a big picture on a person, which would include looking at your liver's ability to detoxify, looking at how your glutathione, how functional your phase one, phase two, your glutathione is. You've got to know all this. Otherwise, you're going to it's going to be like going through the jungle in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so doing a blood test once a year with the doctor covered in your insurance isn't really going to identify any of this.
No, it depends on the blood test you do, but generally it's not what I would call a functional test. It's more of a
Mm-hmm.
test that looks for pathology, unless you did what I did for years in studying Jim Sema and Ken Brockman's work, where I can look at a blood test and I can tell a lot of things that our modern functional tests can tell from the blood work because it's a specialized interpretation. But that's not typical. That's very unusual. So you have to do functional tests. Standardly, what people do is they go to the doctor checks their vitamin D levels, and maybe he checks their serum magnesium and some other vitamins, which is all total useless because
Mm-hmm.
that's only looking at the level in your blood.
Yeah.
It's not looking at the function. It's not looking at the assimilation and the function of that nutrient. For that, you need to do functional tests.
Mm-hmm. So what
I tell
tests
my
are we
patient,
talking about?
well,
Oh, go ahead.
the oats tests
Yeah.
would be an example. The oats test is one. Genova Labs has blood work which is more functional.
Mm-hmm.
Than that. Hair analysis is a fantastic tool if you know how to interpret it correctly. And for that, you have to go to Trace Elements Inc. and look at Dr. Watts's work
Yes.
because he's an absolute genius at interpreting the hair test. You can get more data out of a hair test if you know how to interpret it than a lot of other tests.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a functional test. Problem that I see nowadays is with genetic testing, which is becoming the rage. Because patients don't understand, and I wonder if the doctors do, that a genetic test doesn't mean the patient has this problem now.
Yeah.
It means they have a tendency towards the problem. Because I've had patients come to me who are on like 100 different supplements based on a
Mm-hmm.
genetic test, and they think all these things are wrong with them. And I have explained to them that when you do a genetic test, it's like it's telling you what can happen, not what
Not
is
what
happening.
is. Yeah.
For that, you have to do. I believe the doctor of the future is going to do an extensive genetic panel on the person, and then is going to do extensive functional tests and look at
Mm.
both of them and compare them.
Yep.
And the
That's
genetic test will tell you what the person's susceptible to. The functional test will tell you how far those telemeters have gone to push
mhm.
those
That's
SNPs to see if any of those SNPs are actually active now.
That's what we do with Wild Health Precision Medicine. I just did a 6 month course with them as a practitioner, but it called the Clarity Report. So it'd be genetics, and then you'd have your functional lab blood work on there and GI test and correlate it all together. It's pretty
Mhm.
fascinating, but they
That's the way it should
sadly
be.
just got purchased, and now they're not offering that to people outside of their program.
Oh, okay. Well, you can still put it
It's super
together.
smart.
You can still use different other labs and put the whole thing together.
Yeah,
So
no, it's great. It's a great way to look. But yeah, perfect point that the genetics I love to do, but it doesn't mean what's going on now. If we want to know what are these hidden sources of chronic stress that are contributing to not feeling great, for having gas, bloating, digestive issues, constipation, diarrhea, energy that's low, what we need to do is investigate through multiple labs, not just looking at blood work, but we need organic acids tests, which is urine, oats test, he said, is what that is. Perhaps hair tissue mineral analysis, so we call that HTMA, and then a stool test, as Genomic Diagnostics says, GI effects, or there's GI map. But looking at all these labs together to really figure out what's going on and put those clues together is what you do.
And that's what works, because you
Yeah.
just can't, one test is just not going to tell you everything.
No. Yeah, I
So
know it's so important, but it costs money. That's the problem. People rather spend $10,000 on a bicycle in my world in triathletes, and they don't. My goal of this podcast help people pay attention, get ahead of it. So same with like genetics. This Let's be health optimizers and invest in our health now. Don't wait until you are completely struggling, have all these symptoms that you're saying, but we should be doing preventative testing, not just still waiting until we're having some serious issues.
well, hopefully that's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to help us with, because he's going to
Yes.
influence the insurance companies. One of his goals is to have the type of work that you and I are doing is to be standard with everybody. But in order for that to happen, the insurance companies have to pay for that. So they have to pay for supplements and tests, and
Mm-hmm.
he's planning on getting that done. So we'll
Hopefully.
see. We'll see if they cooperate with him.
Yeah, I know. I look forward to see what the nutritional therapy world looks like in the next 4 years. See if we can make some progress there. How would you suggest people do testing and then figure out what's wrong? Nutritionally, it depends on what changes, what nutritionally best nutrition plan for someone to heal, repair, rebuild their gut, resolve these
Usually,
issues.
usually somebody hit a point in their life when things went wrong. And what I often tell people is get a piece of paper and draw a line from zero when you were born right up to now.
Mm-hmm.
And then look at each year, try to figure out when symptoms started. And you can start to put together some kind of a pattern or a track
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what happened. And very often with Candida patients, they'll do this and they'll come up and they'll say, well, here's where my digestive systems went bad, because here's when I started taking all these laxatives or I started trying probiotics. And then I said, well, look, right, we'll go earlier than that now. What happened? Oh, here's where I was in a car accident and I was on all these antibiotics. Oh, well, okay. Now, see, person was on all these antibiotics. Then after that, they start taking laxatives and probiotics and all these things. So obviously, the antibiotics at some point affected their flora. So we can use that point right there as a point of demarcation where they started to go downhill. Or they'll hit
Mm-hmm.
upon something. They'll say, well, here's where I went to the dentist and I got 12 amalgam fillings put in my mouth. And then 2 years later, I was in for eye surgery or something. So if you draw a timeline like this of all the events of your symptoms and major events that happen, you can get a good idea of how a lot of these things came down. And then that also gives you an idea of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
what it's coincidental to.
Yes. So do kind of a history timeline, look at your signs,
Yeah.
symptoms, and life events, see if you see any red flags or patterns
Very
working in your
useful.
way. Yes, I've heard
It's
that.
very
It is
useful.
good.
It can help you to also pinpoint what testing to do
Mm-hmm.
on the person too.
What are some tests you said for the Candida? Are you pretty much looking at the organic acids test, or which tests and which markers do you look at to see if Candida is overgrown?
The Candida testing for years has been very variable, because it's very difficult to test for Candida, because what you want to do is, most people always want to look at blood work for Candida. That's a physician's impulse, is to look at blood work. The problem with the blood work is it only tells you if the person has elevated antibodies to Candida, which would mean at some time they probably had an elevation in Candida that their immune system is fighting. But that doesn't tell you if the Candida is active now.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to tests on Epstein-Barr, if you don't know which antibody to look at, everybody's going to seem like they're positive. Because I constantly get that. People tell, well, the doctor did the Epstein-Barr test and I have Epstein-Barr. I say, wait a second, let's look at the antibodies. Which one? Doctors love to do IgG. Now,
Mm.
IgG shows you past infection. If you did an IgG in 1960 and you were negative, and then you had Epstein-Barr, your IgM would first go up, then your IgG would go up. Then if you do it in 10 years later and your IgG is still positive, that's normal. Once you've had Epstein-Barr, it's always positive. But
Mm.
then coming down the line, if you did it again in 1980 and it was now 4 times higher than it was in 1970, that would be considered a reactivation. This is where we go wrong with antibody tests, is differentiating reactivation compared to whether or not it's active now. So with Candida, we've had patients with Candida antibodies where they were high at one point when they had Candida, and now they're normal, and their symptoms are worse because their immune system is now blown out from fighting the Candida all those years, and the antibodies are now declining.
Mm.
So
Mm.
you can't do that. You'll be in a spin with those. So
Yeah.
the accurate tests for Candida in terms of whether or not it's active now would be the arabinose
Hmm.
and the oats test.
Yeah.
That's legitimate. When you do a stool test, you encounter another challenge is that half the time the Candida doesn't make it to the lab to be cultured, which is why if you do a stool test, it has to be one of the DNA variety stool tests, like the GI effects.
Hmm.
Um, but even then, you might miss it. I wrote a
Yeah.
booklet. I wrote a booklet which anybody can get if they ask my office. The booklet is actually part of my next volume on my Candida book, which explains how you interpret a stool test to find Candida when it's not showing in the stool.
Oh, good.
Because there are parameters that you're going to find which will imply Candida is there, even though the Candida doesn't show up. And it's really important to know that because that's how you can discover this hidden Candida, you could call it that. My office also has a urine test I developed, which the person can do at home, which tests them for Candida waste products in their urine in
Mm.
real time. So you can see, and this test is very useful because when we treat people, people sometimes will feel really bad and they'll say, I don't know if this is working, I feel worse. And then when we check their urine, we find out they have a dramatic increase of Candida waste products in their urine. So we know they're having Herx reactions. That's why they feel so
Die
bad.
off.
They're having die off, you know.
Hmm. Mm.
But I guess to answer your question, the average person is going to be able to access a notes test. You can do the entire panel, or you can just do the microbiology part, and that's going to be the most accurate thing for the average person to find. Because
Hmm.
if they look at the blood in the stool could deceive them unless they really know what they're looking at.
Hmm. And that will help them if other markers on the oats test, as you were talking about mold toxicity, if that's an issue, that would show up as well on an oats test
And the other thing that will
for
show up is
neurotoxins.
oxalates, which are
Ox.
important because oxalates are most people when they think of oxalates, they think of spinach and they think of all these foods, but Candida produces tons of oxalates. High oxalates in your urine actually could be a sign of Candida.
Mm. Yeah, then that's so common. But why is it so common, do you think? Why is Candida overgrowth such a big area? If once people figure out they do have it, what do you find is the biggest reasons for the overgrowth?
Well, let's look at a simple mechanism. How you get Candida, quote unquote, is by anything really that disturbs your flora. Because the whole point of your normal flora is to contain Candida and keep it as a subdominant part of your flora.
Hmm.
When Candida starts to become a dominant part of your flora, it's because the good bacteria, quote unquote, is compromised and the Candida starts to grow out of control. So anything that disturbs your flora will cause Candida. So now what could that be? Obvious, the first thing are antibiotics. As the Merck manual says, indiscriminate use of broad spectrum antibiotics. Then you have steroids disturb your flora, cause the Candida to grow.
Like corticosteroids.
Corticoid steroids, even glucocorticoids
Mm.
will cause Candida to grow. Too much estrogen medications. cause Candida to grow. Alcohol. Someone's a big drinker, the alcohol will disturb your flora. Coffee, too much coffee. The oils in the coffee kill your flora.
Hmm.
Eating a really bad diet, like the standard American diet, we should call it SAD.
Mhm.
Standard American diet can cause Candida because of all the junk. GMO foods cause Candida. COVID
Hmm.
causes Candida. The COVID vaccine is proven to cause Candida because Japanese studies have shown that the vax kills your bifidus bacteria in your colon. What easier way to get Candida but killing your bifidus in your colon, right?
Hmm.
You could be a swimmer and start um, ingesting too much chlorinated water. That will cause Candida. So the list can go on and on, but it all goes down to the basic thing. Anything that disturbs your flora is what is going to cause Candida. And when you look at how many things there are that can disturb your flora,
It's a big list.
it's a big list. And you stress. If you want to take stress, you get somebody with enough stress that yanks his cortisol high enough. And then what is he going to do? He's going to take medication to deal with the stress.
Mhm.
Well, hello, SSRI inhibitors all cause Candida. They disturb your flora. So if you got a person on Prozac, whatever it is, Prozac, like an antibiotic, can cause Candida because those drugs disturb your flora. So
Yeah.
here's the 1-2 punch with stress. See that the first punch is your cortisol going up, which is going to cause Candida by downregulating your immune response, increasing the amount of circulating glucose in your little capillaries that the Candida feeds into. And then you have your response, which is to take a med that's now going to further aggravate it.
If you listen to the doctor, I went to the doctor when I had issues and they told me, take an antidepressant. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, no, I'm not.
Well, that's part of this wacko culture we have now, where people are all, they're all taking pills. That's the pill culture. I guess going back to the Rolling Stones song, Mother's Little Helper." But my grandparents came here from Italy, and back in those days, in the early 1900s, there was a certain amount of discrimination. They came here with 5 children. He worked 3 jobs. He had his regular day job. He worked at night and he worked on the weekends. And I didn't see him taking pills. He was trying to get ahead of the
Yeah.
world by working.
Support his family.
He wasn't sitting at home saying, "Oh, nobody likes me. Everybody hates me because I'm Italian and I'm an immigrant. So, give me a pill." We have to get real a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think chronic stress is a big area. And so if you take that with athletes that are high performers, overachievers, tend to do too much of everything, and how exercise is that Goldilocks effect for all of that we're talking about, just not too little, not too much of anything, just the right amount. With exercise, when people are doing, say, long distance, as we said, marathons or triathlons, Ironman distance race triathlons, that is a lot of exercise. And people think, as I focus on the show, being fit and healthy because I can do this length of workout, but they don't realize until it's too late sometimes that they're causing some gut issues, dysbiosis, leaky gut, inflammation in their body. So talk about how chronic stress can be from excessive exercise that can contribute to all these different symptoms. Any relationships?
I had a patient once who did the legs mini marathon every year. And we tested her like pretty much every month. We tested all her chemistries because she was in her 60s and she wanted to really do it right and live and be healthy and functional. And we noticed that in every starting July, her cortisol levels started to elevate. And she was getting insomnia. You know. And then after October, she was started to get back in her normal homeostasis. And it occurred to me one day, I was sitting on my couch and a TV commercial came on for the Legs Mini Marathon. And it occurred to me, wow, she does that race every September. That's why her cortisol's shooting up. So at that point, then we looked just at modified her supplement program, modified things, so that it didn't that cortisol rise she was getting from training didn't knock her over. Now,
Hmm.
with other people, that doesn't happen. It depends on the person. Here's where we go back to genetics. But in this particular woman, her body didn't handle the elevation in cortisol well, and it started to cause all these problems. So, it's something, um, it's very personal
Hmm.
because as an athlete, you have the drive to do your personal best, get a PR, to do all this. But then you also have to know where you have to draw the line, where it's just not healthy for you. Not everybody can be a professional athlete and is going to function at that level. So that's really a tough question because there's such that once you get in there, there's such an urge that you have to perform and to do
Yeah.
better.
Yep.
It's a tough one. You just have to, unfortunately, learn from experience, I think.
Well, that's why I think I had problems because I was doing competitive level for my age group competing, not professional, but doing triathlons, Ironman. And when you get into Ironman, you qualify for Ironman Hawaii, then you do other races, and then you're off season. I was doing marathons and 50K trail running. And so then you end up racing or training and racing year round that you don't have like ups and downs, like one race a year. We end up doing them all the time.
I unfortunately had that problem. My running club, which was in Valley Stream, the Valley Stream Running Club, we had an ultra marathon that we sponsored every year.
Mhm.
It was 50 times around the lake at Hedrington Park.
Yeah.
So of course all of us had to participate because we're sponsoring it.
Hmm.
So that would be in December, and then by December we were probably just recovering from the other marathons, the seasonal ones that would occur in September. You have the Marine Corps, you
Mm.
had Monmouth County
Yeah.
Marathon, you had all the ones that are occurring in September, October,
Yeah.
New York City Marathon.
Chicago, New York. Yep.
Yes,
Honolulu. You can just
then
keep doing
And
every month.
Boston.
Yep.
Yes, you can go on, and then that's not when the um triathlons became popular, then of course we also had to be in shape for biking. So my schedule, I typically ran 50 miles a week and biked 150. I would be doing that every week.
Yeah.
And
Slacker.
after a while doing that, then you throw the races in, you can burn out if you're not.
Mm.
I have flat feet.
Mm.
So that didn't go too well. I started developing all kinds of problems regardless of how many orthotics I had. I started
Yeah.
having problems. So when you have bad tires on the car doesn't run as efficiently, and it
You're
puts more
right.
strain on the rest of the car.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of a person just really confronting these things and seeing where you fit in to the picture.
Yeah. And I think that's where I got into genetics. Like, why did I have adrenal exhaustion, whatever it was? I never know. But metabolic chaos, we say, why did it happen to me and other friends could do the same schedule? So that's why
But
I
the,
think that's why I got into genetics. Like, okay, why was I prone? I couldn't handle that excess cortisol and stress as
Here's
much
the
as other
story you're
people.
going to hear from your neighbor who looks at you, you're exercising, you're doing all this stuff right. He looks at you and he says, my grandfather smoked a pack of
Yeah.
cigarettes a day and drank a bottle of scotch, and he died and he was
Yeah.
95.
Yeah. Hear that all the time.
Well, that's great. That was his genetics. And
Hmm.
maybe if he didn't smoke the cigarettes and drink the scotch, he could have lived to be over 100. But for
Yeah.
sure,
Right. Hmm.
genetically, the man was in great shape. That's not
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. Like people, they say that drinking, well, the Europeans drink a bottle of red wine every night. It's fine. But yes. Anyways, the supplements we talk about that you can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits and you can't out exercise poor nutrition habits. What do you suggest for people if they have signs of fatigue and unexplained weight gain and food sensitivities and all this stuff that could be candida? You got thyroid slowing down. How do we work on nutrition? We talk a little bit, it's individualized, but then the supplement part when it's not too much and not what lifestyle habits would maybe help support those changes as well to get results.
I've been toying with writing this book, and I haven't done it. Dr. Watts has gotten into it a little bit, but I haven't really gone the whole way because I don't want to get assassinated.
Yeah.
We can start looking at supplements. I can tell you that a lot of people who come to me, half the supplements that they're on are making them worse
Yep.
because when you take supplements without testing, you don't know what you're doing. So it all
The
begins
muscle
with
testing you're
testing.
talking about?
Any testing, anything
Mm.
that's a guide. Muscle testing is more something that you do in between doing biological tests to get maybe an idea of what's happening. I used to use muscle testing very frequently, but to take supplements, you have to test because you don't know what you're doing to yourself if you don't. A story I always
Mm.
tell was when I first got out of school and I started to practice, a chiropractor referred a medical doctor to me. And the medical doctor had a chronic prostate problem. And he had read in the literature that zinc was good for your prostate. So the medical doctor started taking zinc and his prostate problems went away. And he continued to take the zinc. 3 years later, his prostate problem came back and he couldn't figure out what was wrong because he'd been taking the zinc. So, as a medical doctor would think, I'll double the zinc. And he doubled the zinc and the prostate problem doubled. And he didn't know what to do. So the chiropractor referred him to me. I heard the story. First thing I told him was stop taking zinc and start taking copper.
Mm.
And I did a hair test on him. And a week later, he called me and he said, I don't know, you're crazy or I'm crazy, but my prostate's much better. I'm taking copper and no zinc.
Hmm.
His hair test came back. This guy drove his zinc so high that it depressed his copper. Now, copper controls infections in your body, particularly bacterial infections. And if
Hmm.
you develop a copper deficiency, you're apt to get a bacterial infection in whatever the weakest part of your system is. So his prostate developed an infection.
Mm.
So here's this the concept of I took this one nutrient. I only took that one. I don't know where the level is, but I'm going to keep taking it. And he created a deficiency of copper by excessive intake of zinc. And people are doing things like this all the time. They create imbalances. And it's very easy to do so when you understand how the dominoes fall. So if you take too much vitamin C, well, vitamin C will lower copper because vitamin C forms ascorbic acid oxidase, the enzyme. So you need copper to use vitamin C. If you take excessive vitamin C all the time, you create a copper deficiency.
Hmm.
See,
It's
and you can go through this every vitamin D. If you take excessive amounts of vitamin D, it interferes with assimilation of magnesium. So if you see somebody on a hair test with a high level of magnesium, he's either taking a lot of vitamin D or he lacks B6 because B6 helps you utilize the magnesium.
hmm
Cobalt, if you have high, lots of people have high B12 in their blood and they don't take B12. That's because they have a B2 deficiency. That's called the
hmm
B12 paradox. You don't
Yeah,
have enough B2, you
I
can't
found
use
that
the
out.
B12, right?
Yeah.
On a hair test, you would see the cobalt really high if that's the case. Now, that could also be because you have factors that are depleting your B2, like mercury toxicity. So we can just keep going on and on down the line. If you take too much B1, you'll rip the calcium right out of your teeth. B1 mobilizes calcium, so excessive
Mm.
B1 lowers calcium. We can take any nutrient, and I could show you how taking too much of that nutrient is going to imbalance a whole handful of other nutrients. And the only way you'll know this is by testing.
Yeah. And
You're
that's a
not going to
hair tissue mineral
Here
analysis.
is one of the best ways to figure this out. But if
Yeah.
you take high levels, like CoQ10, if you take high levels of CoQ10, it can cause a flare up of Candida.
Hmm. I
So
can
any
picture that
nutrients,
the map of the mineral map with all the lines
right?
going
You're seeing that,
all
yes,
over.
exactly.
Just Google that,
Mineral,
guys. What's it called? The mineral
the mineral
map
wheel.
or mineral
We call it
wheel?
the
Yeah.
wheel.
I'll share that.
So
That just shows how easy it is.
taking too much of anything without knowing where you're starting from, you can
Yeah.
create an imbalance in your system. And if
Hmm.
the more television things and more of the infomercials you watch on Instagram and all these other things that tell you all about all these great supplements, you don't know if it's
I
great
know.
for you because you don't know what your starting balance is.
Well, that's the thing with those genetic programs. I know a couple clients were doing a genetic test company and they would give them supplements based on their genetics and some labs, but it didn't really look at the whole picture because it was just a blood test. And so it's like, wait, you've got this infection, that going on in this. When we do your other test, they're just looking at your blood work and genetics. So we can't just take those, not priority. And then you end up taking 20, 30 different supplements.
Yeah, but you don't know if if those SNPs are active at that
Yeah,
point.
I know.
Now that's where they need to study the science of telemeters and how the
Mm-hmm.
telemeters then affect your SNPs, how you're programmed. Well, and that's the interesting thing about the jab that we found is I think generally people are always asking me, what does it do? What does it cause? I mean, there's the obvious data that we know that leaked from Pfizer,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all the other data that we know about the jab. But one thing that we've found out is, which is interesting, is it affects your telemeters. How, I don't know, but any genetic illness that runs in your family, if you get the COVID vaccine, that illness is going to occur sooner than it would have, which is a very interesting thing that most people don't know because it's a peculiar thing that you would only know if you interviewed and worked with a lot of people who were jabbed and then saw what happened as years went
Patterns.
by. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. All right. So what would you finish with? What endurance athletes, aging individuals, if we're on a mission to thrive as we age, health optimizers is one suggestion category. The other, those that, oh, I am struggling with all these random things. How should I get started? So we've got people that don't really know what's going on. Maybe they have the symptoms and are not aware of it. Health optimizers, and then those people that are struggling, doing all the right things, can't figure it out. What should they do?
First thing is eat organic. For the newcomers, try to eat organic. Avoid GMO foods. They're banned in Europe, so why should we be eating them here?
Yeah.
Seed oils are the next big thing, the
Mm-hmm.
floorboard that hits you in the face. Everything that they told us saturated fats and sugar was doing, actually seed oils are responsible for that. So if they just avoid eating non-organic, if they eat non-GMO and they avoid seed oils, they're already doing really well. The next thing you want to do is get tested. Try to sort out your symptoms a little bit, as we were saying before, and then go to somebody who can test you and give you an idea of what you need based on functional tests.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, you're going in the right direction.
And your top three tests, 3 to 5 tests, what would you have people do?
I would have a person do a genetic test, a hair test, and then would depend on the person whether or not you would do blood work on them or the oats test or
Mm-hmm.
the Dutch test. You have to listen, like, what does it seem like they need? Does it seem that they're hormonally challenged or they metabolically challenged? So I would say that's an individual point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it adds up. I mean, you say, well, HTMAs say about $200 in genetics. I mean,
Um,
they're all about $200 to $500,
yeah,
$300.
yeah, yeah. So you can end up in a few thousand. So the better way to do it is just try to see where you're more challenged, and the practitioner
Mm.
should help you with that.
Yeah, that's what I like using Nutritional Therapy Association. We have a signs and symptoms intake form, and you can really get a good picture of where people are struggling and what
That's
that
a
might be
very good
connected
place
to.
to start.
Hmm.
They've been used historically, like diagnostics like that, questionnaires have been used historically forever, and they were originated
This
by a lot of the
book
Bible
right
companies. Yeah,
here,
there
this
it
one,
is. That's the manual. Yep,
yeah, it has a lot of papers in it.
yep. Well, that's okay. That's one of the Bibles that's evolved
It
over the
is.
years. Yeah,
It's amazing. But now I don't really need to use this because it's all on the computer programs now. That's like,
right.
oh, I don't have to go buy each one.
This is true. This is true.
Oh,
Good place to
it's just-
start.
Good. And then what are you doing for your, are you taking clients? Do you want to share any links, help people get started if they're struggling, books
Sure,
to read?
if someone wants to contact me, they can do it through one of three websites. My main website is health-truth.com. And my two other websites are the New York City Thyroid Doctor and the New York City Candida Doctor.
But you're not in New York City, are you? I see a palm tree in the window.
No, I'm not there, luckily, but that's where my license is and that's where my practice is. But
All right.
I happen to not be there because I only do virtual consultations with people.
Yeah. Is that since 2020?
No,
Or have you
actually,
been?
I did my first one in 1987.
Oh, nice.
First phone
Bit of it.
consultation in 1987, and it's just increased over the years. It got to the point where at one point it was half of everything we did was by phone. And then when we had the internet, it went to three-quarters became
Hmm.
virtual. So now
Yeah,
we
you can
just
be
decided to
anywhere.
go all virtual. Yeah, yeah.
I was think that's a good thing of one of the positives is 4 years ago that people realize I don't have to do all that in person. I can just
It
work on
did
Zoom.
push things. Yeah, it did push
Yeah.
where things were going inevitably. That is true.
Except for I still think we need in-person stuff and have community, which is why I do lunchtime master swimming because working at home alone, Zoom calls, I need people connection still that we don't get so much as on a Zoom call here.
That is true.
Yeah, so people still need that community connection in person, touch, hugging. So thank
That's
you so
very that
much for your wisdom. I'm fascinated about the whole Candida and thyroid connection, and I'll have to dive into that a little bit more. But I think that's a good correlation to look at and learn more for practitioners and for clients.
I agree.
Good job. And what book are you coming out with next year then?
That's going to be volume 2 of my book, which is on Amazon, like everything else.
Yeah.
The Candida Chronicles, volume 2.
Volume 2. All right. We'll put everything in the show notes and we look forward to learning more. And hopefully, people start doing their own health investigation with a practitioner or reach out to someone as yourself and get their body in balance, homeostasis.
The drug companies will hate you.
Yeah, but we hopefully see that change soon. Thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.